Alby, everybody knows you as Alby Yarnton, but who is Alby? What are your other names?
Well, I'm only Alby when I'm in Australia. I'm Albert when I'm in England. Everybody calls me Albert.
Albert. And is there a middle name?
Edward.
Edward.
Which, of course, makes Albert Edward a royal name, one of Queen Victoria's, well, I think it's her husband.
Well, that was my thinking. That's very, very regal.
Yeah.
And even Yarnton's pretty spiffy, isn't it? That's nice. Yeah. And you were born on the 6th of June, 1926?
Exactly.
Perfect.
That
makes you 96.
96 at the moment.
Absolutely wonderful. Now, I'm told that you're the founder of our Marino Probus Club.
Yes, I founded the club. I think I've been president about at least 3 times.
Yeah.
At the moment, I think I'm getting a bit old, but I still love the fact that we've got a good variety of members. And all those members, well, some save money and buy cheap cheese, which I think is wrong. Buy decent cheese.
Buy decent cheese. I'll pass it on.
Yeah.
So how did you find out about Probus? When you came to Adelaide, you built your home, which is next door to Kingston House.
Well, when I came to Adelaide and we formed the Marino Probus Club, I had already formed 2 Probus clubs in Mount Gambier.
Ah, right.
So I knew all about it.
Yep.
And the president of Rotary lived across the road from me, and he wanted me to join his Rotary club. And I said, look, I'll come 300 miles to get away from everything. And when you're in country town, you get mixed up with everything that needs the president. You either look after the school, which I did. That was Gambier North, and my parts manager used to get every Wednesday off to go and teach kids the art of AFL, he being a former AFL player. I think I was president of the Motor Traders Association.
So you had a good experience of leadership in the community. There's no question about that from coming up from down Mount Gambier.
Yes, the first thing I had, somebody asked me would I give a talk to the Rotary Club, which I did, and they found it, my history was probably more interesting than the fact that I had become the international harvester dealer. The fact that I had piloted ships.
Yep.
And there is a bit of film around with me on the bridge of a ship, not with the captain. The captain had left me in charge and had gone to the office in the city. I had the first mate on with me, and the funny thing is that I was wearing a beret. And the beret was because my peak cap had taken to the water, had blown off.
We'll get back to those stories a bit later on, Alby, but I just want to track on a couple of things here. So you started our Probus Club at Marino, which I proudly am a member of, and I read in our directory here that you were inducted in 1987. Now, if you were the founding member, who inducted you?
The president of Rotary.
Oh, so there was a connection, or there
yes,
is a connection?
A Probus Club can only be founded by a Rotary Club.
Now, there's a very interesting point. I wonder how many of our members know that. That is incredible.
Probably a lot of them don't know that it's...
Well, with the changing of the guard, I've got to suggest, over the years, you know, that sort of information disappears. No, you're right. So, clearly you're British. You're born in the UK in 1926. Tell me about your mum. Where was your mum born? Was she a Londoner?
She was.
And what year would she have been born, Alby?
My mother and father were both London born. I was born at Greenwich, right by the river. I think it was the house shown.
Yeah.
And my first school was called Royal Hill School, and it was...
Did it have the crest above the gate?
It was between my house and the... What's the place at the top of the hill with the telescope to the stars? Ooh. The observatory.
The observatory, right. In
yes.
London?
In London.
In London town?
Yes, that's in Greenwich Park.
Okay.
And I used to go through the park to school.
Okay.
And nowadays, right close to where I lived, the Cutty Sark rests.
Right. Okay.
And can I claim fame that I was on the last voyage of the Cutty Sark?
Seriously? How? Well, and what year was that?
It's a good question.
Contemplate that. Come back to your mum. How many sisters and brothers did your mum have?
Oh, look, this question of being in the last passage, it was actually from midstream on the Thames into the dry dock that had been prepared.
Right, okay.
And the crew were all the local watermen and pilots and that. So we could say we were in the last crew.
That's exciting. That's excellent, yeah. And can you remember what year that was? Was it in the 50s or 60s, or would you know?
No, well...
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We'll come back. It'll pop up. It'll pop up. Send me a message in the middle of the night when you remember. You can do that. You've got my new number.
No.
I didn't kid. So your dad clearly was a Londoner. Do you know how your mum and dad met? Was it at school, or were they? Your dad was doing stuff on the river and.
Well, my dad was at sea when he sort of married my mother.
Yeah.
And then he...
Was he in the Merchant Navy, Alby?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
And what about during the First World War? Would he have been old enough to have served in the Navy, or was he still a merchant seaman during that?
Yes, he was at the Dardanelles on a ship, and I think he was about 18.
That was in the conflict that we relate to through Gallipoli. That was in that area, wasn't it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then, so after the war, did your dad then get employment on the river?
Yes.
What was the transition for your dad from being a merchant seaman to being a pilot on the Thames? Like, how did that happen? Do you know when that would have happened? At what age?
Well, one of the aims of any seaman, whether it's Port Adelaide or wherever, is to get a home-based job.
Yeah, right.
And you can, well, in South Australia, they only had 6 pilots who would take it in turns to pilot in Whyalla or wherever. So there wasn't a lot of work in my field. I could have had a job on the St Lawrence Seaway.
Wow.
But that was 10 months a year
Oh.
because it freezes over. And I thought, that's cold. I've been cold. I know what it's like to be cold. And so I decided the other end, I'll try Australia. And I had the idea of looking through Perth, and if there's nothing there, then I thought, Perth's too far from anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So I came to Adelaide, was prepared to go on to Melbourne or Sydney. I mean, I could have got a job in Sydney in the drop of a hat. But I found Adelaide a very nice place to live.
We'll come back to that, but let's go back into London, where your mum and dad were, and clearly had a family.
Yes.
Tell me, so brothers and sisters. You mentioned
Yes.
earlier on you had a sister, but how many young ones? How many siblings were there?
Well, I was one, and I was the middle one of three.
Okay.
The eldest girl, she's 2 years older than me, but the youngest was 2 or 3 years younger than me.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Then did you live close to the river, like your dad was able to ride his bike to work and that sort of thing? Were you close?
yes, to start with. We got back to Greenwich, and we settled in Greenwich between the Cutty Sark, one side of the main road, and the observatory at the top of the hill. And that's where I first went to school.
Oh, right, okay. So that would have been, could I suggest, that was about 1931 or 2, were you 5?
Something about then.
Okay.
I didn't write it in my diary.
Oh, well, I was just doing some sums here. You were 1926, you were 5 years to go to school, 1931. So we'll work on that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and at that stage, when do you recall you had an interest in the water as a seaman?
Well, when you're young, you would look up to your father. And, well, as I say, I wanted to be a sailor. And my first drama was when I found that a sheet of newspaper on a funnel, on a puddle,
Yes.
you don't get much experience. It's your first calamity. It didn't hold me up, but I tried to be a sailor when I was probably 2 years old.
Yeah.
And I recall my first Christmas present was a tin sailor, which when you wound it up and you put it on the centre leaf of the dining table with one end on the stairs, it waddled down. And that, I think it was made in Japan.
Japan back in then.
Yeah.
That was lovely. And so during your school years, you maintained an interest in the sea and the stuff your dad was doing, and did you used to go to work with your dad?
Well, I won a scholarship through the London County Council, which entitled me to go to what you'd call grammar school. And I went to a school called Addy and Stanhope. Now, the school was originally founded by a shipwright.
Oh.
And so the connection was there. We weren't allowed to leave the school at lunchtime unless we were going home for lunch. I managed to get to Greenwich from the school at lunchtime, totally out of bounds, but I was down by the river at Greenwich. And I know I found a roll of brown paper like you have in the shop. And that was floating, and I managed to get that out of the water. And yeah, it was a stupid thing, and I hung on to it, as it were.
Was that just a souvenir, finding something floating on the river?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen various things on the water, and once I was to the stage of piloting ships. On one occasion, we had a Norwegian ship under control. It was moored in midstream, and I had two lads working in the launch, and they had to put the watchman for the ship, like there's a man in the ship's crew as designated watchman. And so the watchman was supposed to come back at 5 o'clock, and the lads would then go home for dinner. When I got down late at night to take the ship away, I said, "Did the watchman get back?" And the lad said, "We waited till 7 o'clock and we went to get our dinner." Night times, eh? And at the top of the stairs, where we pick people up from to take them off, there's a little pile of clothes. The watchman had come back, and because the ship was only 100 yards away, eventually he'd been shouting, and of course launch had gone home. He decided he could swim across there, and then he found I had an Aldous lamp in the launch. I thought, we better go look, see if we can find. Well, we found him a mile or so upstream, where he'd managed to clamber on a moored barge, and there he was, in the nude, freezing cold.
Yeah, waiting to be picked up.
But we saved him. He says, "Pilot, the tide is very strong." Well, talking of very strong, certain ships in a position where 3 ships are moored, I've got to take the inside one away, and the shore is there. Very narrow, strong current from the power station discharging water. And I used to get the engineer up on deck. I'd say to the captain, "Do you mind if I have a word with the engineer?" No, do whatever you want. And I'd have the engineer up. I'd say, "Look, Chief, motor ships start their main engines with compressed air into one cylinder." And I said, "Look, Chief, this is our problem. Chief engineer on a motor ship, if you have too many main engine movements where they use compressed air, you get a phone call from the engine room to the bridge saying, 'I've got 2 starts left.'"
Okay.
So you've got to work that out. And I said, "Well, this is our problem." And I'd explain to the engineer why I'm going to have dead slow and then full and then stop and then start again, because we've got all these various currents. Now, whilst I was doing that, I could look ashore about 100 yards away, and the watchman from Thomas Borthwick and Sons was looking over the wall, and there was a man trying to get on one of the barges. They had turkeys in cold store in these barges, and this fella knew about them, and he was trying to get a turkey for his dinner, his Christmas dinner. Well, next thing is, police car at that next landing, police car at that next thing, police launch between me and the and this fella. And I think he probably got his Christmas dinner in
jail.
In the jail. But things happen on the Thames.
So what age then was it that you decided you wanted to work on the river? Your dad was on the river. Was there a time that your dad said, "Come and work with me, Alby"? And if that is so, like about what age was that?
Well, I will say that I personally wanted to go in the Navy, and I had enough education to go straight to, was it Dartmouth, I think, and but my father says, "You are not going in." He'd been in the Navy, and so I wasn't allowed to do what I wanted. I had to do what my father wanted, and he wanted me to follow in his footsteps. So I was duty bound to follow him.
So you worked on the river until 1939 when war, is that when you joined the army?
Yes, I worked on the river. I was in the Merchant Navy for 12 months, and that basically was going out to sea and dumping spoil from dredging.
Okay.
And it was to learn the river. So it was up and down and out to sea.
Right.
And then, well, yes. Anyway, I don't know where I was.
No, you were. My question was about when you joined the army.
Yes, well, as I say, I did 12 months in the Merchant Navy.
Yeah.
And then that was rather interesting, but the vessel I was on did not have any electrics, and so we used to have to go, I was thinking every other week, we'd go alongside Purfleet and we'd be degaussed. In other words, they hung wires all round the vessel and passed current round against magnetic mines.
Okay.
And say after 12 months, I'd done enough river, and so I went ashore and immediately was in the army.
Ah, rightio. So that and I'm just going to move on a little bit here. So, as I recall being told by your good self over a coffee one day, you were actually went to Egypt, or you were in the Middle East.
Yes.
And the word went out, we need young Yarnton back here.
Well, my first posting was in Egypt, and believe it, when I got there, I'm still the youngest fellow in the army, I think, and the rest said, "Can you ride a motorbike, son?" Can I ever ride a motorbike? But I didn't realise that I was getting this rotten end of the stick, and I used to have to ride the motorbike from our depot on the Nile, on the Nile, into the Sweetwater Canal and chase the barges up, because we had barges working for the army. And then when they said, "Can you drive a truck?" I said, "What sort of truck?" Yeah, I think it was a 30 hundredweight Bedford with a pole right up the front. And then I realised what I'd been doing was piano wires across. But the Egyptian students didn't like the Brits.
Wow.
So I then drove this truck for a little while, and then I got shipped out back to England, because my father was in hospital. I was shipped back to do his job, and I knew enough about it, and so I did 3 months transfer back to England. And then I ended up in Venice, and that was the best posting you could ever get in the army.
So did you go from Egypt back to the UK, then to Venice, or did they poke you off to Venice on the way back to the UK?
No, I went back to the UK from Egypt.
Yep. And what was your job in Venice? What did they say? Go and do what, Alby?
Yeah, ramped cargo lighters, and they were Z80, 81, Z80, Z83. There was 4 of them anyway, and they were based in Venice. And so I became the captain. I was the only one that could handle craft. I became the captain of Z83. Now, that was a good posting.
Can I ask you what rank you were carrying?
I should have been a bit more positive, and I would have had 3 stripes. I didn't. I happy to be the captain of this thing. And I used to have to go to, what's the place where the Americans had their headquarters decided, and so the officer in charge there, Major Frederick D. Blanchard, United States 8th Army. I've still got his pass. He gave me a pass to eat in their mess, which was white tablecloth, silver service, and 10 different juices.
Beautiful.
I had the treatment there, but
How long were you in Venice for, Alby?
About 9 months.
9 months. Oh,
Yes, 9 months in Venice.
good posting.
It was a great posting.
Yeah.
I could get 9 trucks on this. It's a very wide, flat tank, you might say. And you get 3 abreast and 3 deep. So I could get 9 of those on. And I'd pick them up in Marino and go all the way through Venice to the Lido, where the Americans had their headquarters.
Where you used to dine in style.
Oh, did I ever? Yeah.
Did you make your arrivals daily at mealtime so that you could...
Try to. You work things out, you know. But on one occasion, one of my crew... I used to have an odd crew. They couldn't put him anywhere, and so they'd put him with me. And this fellow's name I shall never forget, Ledbetter. And he was about 6'7", but he didn't have boots big enough for him. He only had plimsolls, and so they put him with me. And we're going into the landing at Lido on one occasion, and I'll say with 3 engines, all right-handed, they don't help the manoeuvring. And as we're going in, I shout from the bridge the other end, "Let go," meaning drop the ramp. And we drop the ramp and keep her going on it till we get a mooring out. He let go of the ramp, but he forgot to take the dog out of the winch, and so it stayed up, and I went further forward, and I knocked the pole down that carried the trolley bus wires. Crazy and greasy. But on the way back on the next trip, I called into our headquarters, which is across from San Marco, to report this damage, you see. I went in, and the captain said, What do you want, Yarnton? I said, well, I'll report some damage. Oh, don't worry about that. We do damage everywhere we go. Forget it. Yeah.
So after Venice, did you get transferred still in the army back to the UK?
Yeah, I was released from the army.
Okay, civilian. So you're back to Alby Yarnton again.
Yes.
And did you go back home to...
Yes.
below the observatory and between the Cutty Sark, you moved in
Yes,
to home.
I went back home. It
How was
was
Dad at that
to
point?
take place of my father,
Yeah,
who was in hospital.
right. Still in hospital.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had to report, whether it was every week or every 2 weeks, to some solicitor, a former army man, and he would say, "Oh, I'd tell him what I was doing, and I'd carry on." But
Can I go back a bit? And I'm on recall here. I remember you telling me a story about when you were in Egypt and you got the call to go back to the UK, and you were on an aircraft, and a senior ranked army guy gave you a penny and you put it behind your badge and you kept it there for an emergency. Do you want to tell us
Yes.
about that story?
he was a full colonel, and he'd been in Egypt, you know, ordering stuff, and he knew that I was going back because my father was in hospital, and he said, you know, "Have you got any money?" I hated to say anything that I was broke,
Yeah.
but he befriended me. We went from Egypt by Sunderland flying boat, taking off from the Nile. And when we got back to England, it was down to the southwest of England where flying boats came in. And again he came and said, "Now look here, son." You know, son. I was so young in all this. "If you're in any trouble, give me a ring." And he gave me his phone number in London. And I thought, now you get some horrid tales of some sergeant major bullying you. Here's a man with a heart. High rank, didn't forget the young lad. He looked after me, and he had a car waiting for him. And all the rest of the passengers from the flying boat, we had a bus. Now that bus was designated to go to London and drop off at the various hotels. Well, we stopped halfway to go into a cafe. I stood outside. I still only had a penny behind my badge. And anyway, the bus wouldn't start when we came out again. So they're trying to push it uphill. And I said, "Why don't we roll it backwards and drop it?" Because we were on a hill. Which we did to start the damn thing up again. And I went to the King's Cross Hotel, and there were 2 cooks waiting for me, and they said, "You've got to go to the Sergeant Major's office at 9 o'clock, have a good feed before you do, and he'll fix you up with a..." And that's my exit from the army.
How good's that? That was great. So you got back home, and then there was obviously this moment when you were going to go on the river, and you took over your dad's duties.
Yes, basically.
Was the war still on, or it had finished at that point? It was 44, 5, 6, 47?
It wasn't long before my father was out and about again, and if he had 3 ships on his hands, he'd give me the smallest one. And so I didn't mind that, because my Z-83 was like a big ship. It was pretty big, you know. But no, I enjoyed every minute.
So at what point was it then that Alby Yarnton decided one day, I'm going to go exploring. I'm going to cut loose out of the UK and I'm going to go. And you ended up coming to Australia. What was it? Was it a dart on a board thing that chose Australia, or was there something else?
Well, firstly, I had to leave the Thames because we were into the colliers, ships of about 2,000-3,000 tonne, and they were gradually not being there. And so there were no ships, and there are no ships basically on the Thames.
Right.
And they built the barrier at Woolwich, and that, by the way, the centre arch is exactly the same arch width as Tower Bridge. It's miles apart, but built for that purpose if ships needed to go beyond Tower Bridge. Yeah, that was...
So when would, as in date thing, so was that about the time you decided to start looking? When it became obvious
Yes,
the colliers
when
weren't going to come back
the
on
work
river?
started to get less.
Yeah.
Because I think Maggie Thatcher had closed the mines.
Yep.
And the mines had been shipping coal. The best coal was coming from South Wales,
Yep.
anthracite,
Yep.
but most of the coal was coming from the northeast of England, Tyneside
Yep.
there.
So you came to Australia at a point, and were you married at that point? Had you?
Oh, married, yeah,
Yeah, well,
I had
okay.
3 kids.
Yep. So that would have been a pretty big decision to make, to say to your darling, we're going to pack up and head to the other side of the world.
Exactly. When I say I'd made my decision, but I hadn't really broached it to my wife.
Oh, brave man.
Yes, and that's right. And I was surprised when she totally agreed with me.
I've got a similar person, but that's another story. Oh, well, there you go. And so we'll pick up on the comment you made earlier on, that you actually came into Adelaide with the view of, well, you said Perth was too far away.
Well, I could have been
Options on
in
the East
there,
Coast.
in Adelaide, I could have been in their dredging fleet, but I didn't want to be in their dredging fleet.
Yeah.
And funny thing was that sometime after that, the dredger that they were using, the watchman on board drowned because the whole thing turned over. It was top heavy.
Ooh.
And the watchman of the dredger, he drowned.
Was that here in Adelaide, Alby?
Yes,
In the river system as we know it?
off Adelaide.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, the ships into Adelaide used to anchor at Outer Harbour. These days, they anchor, it's called, I think, they have an anchorage the other side of the Gulf. And if you look at night, last night there were 3 ships waiting at that anchorage at the other side, because the anchorage they had been using, they turned up so much it wasn't holding ships.
Okay.
So the ships now go to moorings on the other side.
Okay. So you were here with your wife and your children, looking at trying to get onto a pilot-related or marine type thing.
No, there was little available in Adelaide, shall I say, for me.
Yeah.
I could have probably got a job taking the pilots out to the ships. Not my style.
No.
I reckon I could have gone to Sydney, and there's a dozen jobs waiting there. I could have gone to the St Lawrence Seaway, but who wants to go there when it's frozen for
Anyone
2
that likes
months
ice
a
skating,
year?
I suppose. Yeah.
So, Anyway, that's why I came to Adelaide. Never regretted a moment of coming to Adelaide.
And somehow you ended up down the southeast.
Yeah, I ended up in the southeast because I had money. I was a well-off man, shall I say.
Well done.
Then.
Good on you.
And I found out that the dealership in Mount Gambier, the dealer himself was okay. He'd worked for Inters before he bought the dealership.
Inters being International Harvester trucks. International
But
trucks.
his son was we would call him a pufter. He wasn't a man to be in the dealership. And anyway, it was an opening there, and in no time I sold 15 prime movers, unfortunately 12 to Alby Yarnton and 3 to Alan Scott.
Both big wheelers and dealers in the industry, for those that know the industry. You were dealing with the movers and shakers, Alby.
Yeah.
So keep going. Yes.
Well, Alby Yarnton was a fair man.
Yes.
Scotty, you knew that the engine in that prime mover was not the one you looked at when you said, I'll give you X for it. You know? He would change engines and gearboxes. That's Scotty.
So Mr. Sheldon, just to sort of give a background, is part of the K&S or Kane and Sheldon name that we see on the roads these days.
That's
K&S
right.
Holdings, K&S
That
Fueling.
was Alby Yarnton.
Yeah. And that K&S has since acquired Scott's Industries, Scott Haulage, Northern Territory Transport. So
that's right.
You were dealing with both the owners of both companies and the owner of...
When I sold 15 prime movers, I had 15 trade-ins. They said, "Good day, Alby," every morning. But the Shelton ones I got rid of inside 12 months. Yeah. Scotty ones sat there for about 3 years.
Well, I think, and the reason why is because people saw the two previous owners as one being reliable and one not quite so.
Yeah.
So how long did you have your dealership down there for?
22 years.
Lovely. And I believe you built a beautiful big home in Mount Gambier on the side of the hill?
Well, I sold out to the Holden dealer. Nobody knew anything about it because I used to meet Owen Roberts round by the gun club and we'd discuss things. Nobody knew. And anyway, I eventually got out of that, and there was the opportunity to come back to Adelaide.
Okay, and have you got some sort of year when that was that you came from Mount Gambier and arrived back in Adelaide to settle down?
Yes, and across the road from my house, I bought up near the lighthouse, was the president of the Rotary Club, and he wanted me to join his Rotary Club. And I said, look, I've left Mount Gambier and I've managed to tie all T's that I had. You know, you're in everything there. And anyway, I told him I didn't want to be in Rotary. Anyway, he came back the next day, he says, look, we're thinking of starting a Probus Club. Are you interested? Well, I'd started 2 Probus Clubs in Mount Gambier.
Okay. Yeah.
So I knew all about it.
Yep.
And I thought, this is not bad luck.
Yeah.
And it got me off the hook for a lot of other things.
So we're getting onto the Probus thing now. Can you recall the names of some of the first members that when you started the club, who was there?
Yes. One lived up there, well, his wife still lives up there. He was the secretary of the club. I had a portable typewriter, which was the office business. There was a sea captain, and made him outings man. He'd never been anywhere but sea.
Can you remember any of the names?
I probably could in the middle of the night.
Well, message me if you do.
Yeah.
So was the first? Has the venue always been the Kingston House?
Yes.
Venue, yeah.
We did a formation meeting at Kingston House. After a while, there was a move to a pub, and I fought against that. I said no, and we stayed there, and that's where we started, and that's where we are now. And I think it's a good venue. We have an excuse that we don't have ladies in our club because the rooms are not big enough, which is bullshit.
Yes, Alby.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another story for another time. I'm going to start to wind up from my... I want to say that one of the finest men I've ever met in my life is you. I think you're just an absolute bloody treasure, Alby, and I tell you, my membership of this Probus Club has got a lot to do with men like you, and I just want to thank you for your time.
Yes, the club is as strong as its members,
yes.
and we've got lots of good members. Yeah, most of when I say most, I'm leaving the opportunity for some bad egg to join the club, and then we'll get rid of him.